When considering AI, here are 3 points to bear in mind. The first starts with a true story from some 200 years ago, which I'll simplify down to one village and industry and use modern pay scales, but don't let those distract you from the historical accuracy of this tale. Once upon a time, there was a village in the countryside where they raised sheep and made wool cloth. Over time, one family grew wealthy and started hiring their neighbors to make the cloth. They paid their neighbors $200 a day to weave, and then they sold the cloth. That was a living wage, so the neighbors didn't mind working for this family. And eventually, all 300 people or so in the village worked for this one family, and they let their own flocks and tools go because it was easier to just work for this one family who grew very wealthy indeed. So wealthy that they built a factory and bought a set of massive industrial looms. These looms could do the work of the entire village in a day with only 5 employees to tend to the machines. So the family immediately fired 295 of the villagers and cut the pay for the remaining 5 down to only $50 a day because they knew they could be easily replaced from the now massive pool of unemployed villagers. The villagers were furious. Even if they started themselves weaving again, there was no way they could compete with the low prices that rich family could sell at with their looms, and they had no other way to make a living. As the families watched their children starve, they grew outraged and they organized. They went to their rich family and asked them to hire them back, and the rich family laughed at them. So the next night, the villagers broke into the factory and smashed all the looms. The rich family was outraged, bought more looms and armed guards. Villagers fought the guards, smashed these looms too. All this took time, and during that time, the rich family was not selling any cloth. So eventually, they posted jobs again, the old weaving jobs, for $200 a day. The organized villagers met with the rich family and said, "We'll work for you again, but since you could afford to buy multiple sets of these $1,000,000 machines, then it seems pretty clear that we weren't getting our fair share of the profit we were generating for you. So our wage is now $300 a day, and if you ever try and pull that crap again, every one of us walks away and there'll be no one to tend to your theft machines. All your profits are built on our labor, and if you ever forget that again, we're happy to remind you. When you use new technologies to drive the value of our labor and the quality of our lives down, instead of lifting the entire community up, then we will prevent your technologies from functioning at all, and you will not make a single penny." The rich family agreed, but then organized with all the other rich families in the other villages to create an army, and they used that army to round up and execute all the organizers from all the villages and crush the traumatized communities into compliance. They bought new looms and drove the value of labor so far below a living wage that the traumatized villagers had no time to do anything but try and scrape together crumbs for their next meal. And those families used the skyrocketing profits to convince the traumatized villagers that having different colored crumbs to scrape together was the pinnacle of freedom and fulfillment. They then took great care in writing the history books and painted the people who had smashed their looms as anti-technology and opposed to progress. This is the actual history of the Luddite movement. The Luddites were not opposed to technology for some abstract spiritual reasons. They were opposed to the intentional devaluation of their labor and the weaponization of technology against them to starve their families, while mill owners bathed in champagne. I remember when I learned about the Luddites in junior high thinking, what idiots, technology is great. The fact that my state-sponsored education left me with only that conclusion is because the mill owners won. The lesson here is this: the ethics of technology are in what is being done with it. GMO crops are a great example of this. I understand biology well enough to know that there's no biological risk in most GM foods. Almost all of it is just accelerating what organic growers select for over generations anyway, like synchronized germination and fruit size. We want fat kernels of grain that all mature at the same time. So I have no particular issue with GM technology on its own terms. I categorically oppose all GM foods and companies because of what is being done with it. It's a weapon. Those genes are trademarked and then intentionally planted next to organic, traditional, and indigenous growers' fields. When they cross-pollinate, as all grain does, then the massive multinational corporations who own the patented genes sue the small-scale organic and indigenous growers for copyright infringement and shut them down. They intentionally crush both market competition and, more importantly, biodiversity and indigeneity using GM crops. AI is the most powerful technology our species has ever developed, far more powerful than nuclear weapons, because nuclear weapons only work as a threat. No sane government would ever use them because it would end the world. But AI is already shaping our entire world, and that's only going to rapidly increase and become ever harder to spot. We're currently in the only iteration of AI that will ever be identifiable. In 5 years, it'll be completely undetectable. That means that it is insidious in a way that's impossible to overstate, especially in the context of algorithms. Next-gen AI algorithms won't even need to aggregate content to shape your worldview. It'll just create content, custom-tailored to your ethics, woven into your feed. Whatever type of person you think is the most compelling, next-gen AI will just make videos of that exact person saying exactly what the programming wants you to hear. The same way that I have a relationship with and some trust for creators I appreciate, like Crutches and Spice or Madeline Pendleton, we will have relationships with AI that we don't know are AI, and it will shape our worldviews. So with that in mind, the question of this first point is this. Holistically, do you believe that the application of the most powerful technologies that we have today is ethical? I'm not asking if there are specific uses of technology which are healthy or helpful, or whether technology is ever used for good. Obviously, it can be. I'm asking if overall you think that the application of the most powerful technologies in the world today are making the world better. Like, do you believe that current social media algorithms and nuclear weapons are making the world better? If not, then consider this. If you gave someone $100 and they used it to buy a weapon and rob you and your whole community, would you think it was wise to give them $1 million? The other part of this first point is this. What would you think if the person who you'd given $100 to and had used it to rob your whole community desperately wanted something? If that thief was using all their ill-gotten gains to get something, would you think that the effect of them getting that thing would be good for your community? The entities who really, really, really want AI are the CIA. The whole US government, but the CIA in particular, are the ones buying the most horrifying contracts and technologies, and megacorporations, Meta, Amazon, BlackRock, Blackwater. These are the entities who are now funding nuclear reactors and buying every water and power contract on the market out for decades to drive emergent AI. So do you think that the CIA, Zuckerberg, Bezos, and the largest private corporate militaries in the world having the most powerful tool in the history of the world is going to be beneficial for us, even if we get multicolored breadcrumbs of next-gen Alexa or ChatGPT or laundry robots along the way? The second point about AI is this. The heart of the colonial disease is dehumanization. Dehumanization of other people, dehumanization of ourselves, a severance of our inherently connective nature. Pick a prejudice, racism, sexism, ageism, whatever. The core underneath each is a dehumanization of other people, and any belief or action that reinforces any dehumanization reinforces all dehumanization. Put simply, either everyone's human or no one is. When men think of or treat women as less than, we are removing both men and women from the category of human in our minds. If this is healthy humanity, we're saying we men are up here more than you human, and you women are down here less than human. It is a violent severance from reality and humanity. More accurately, it's a removal of our own awareness of reality. In reality, we're all human, and that can never be taken away. So what we're doing is a violence to ourselves by separating our belief from reality, which sets us up to commit violence against other people. The best medicine I've ever known to counter this colonial disease of dehumanization is human contact. When I spent a bunch of time in New Orleans' Lower Ninth District helping rebuild after Katrina, as the only white person for miles around, a bunch of my inherited racism just kind of dissolved in the humanity of the black communities that I was living with. Not entirely, of course I still carry elements of racism, but that was good medicine for me. We are already seeing this vast emergence of AI taking the place of human contact. So many men are now developing relationships with AI girlfriends, and those relationships are deeply important to them. It appears to meet a need that many of them have never felt met before. And the data that comes out of those interactions is horrifying. Turns out, when you give men unrestricted anonymous access to femme-coded entities, a terrifying number of men immediately started engaging in wildly abusive and violent ways. There is so much to unpack in this, like how it reveals that modern society does not help men understand that we don't want to cause harm. Instead, it teaches us that we're not explicitly allowed to cause harm. The lesson under that is that we secretly do want to cause harm, and the way our culture raises boys in particular drives this lesson home in terrifying ways. High school boys chanting, "Your body, my choice," feel like they're finally being freed from the artificial restrictions that have been imposed on them by big feminism, and now they're liberated to act in naturally violent and harmful ways. The scale of societal failure that this reveals is apocalyptically dystopian. Healthy humans don't want to hurt other people. Men are humans, so the trend of men immediately wanting to harm, degrade, and abuse femme-coded AI reveals a wound in modern masculinity, and the nature of the wound means that the most wounded men won't even be able to see it as a wound. They'll just think it's men's nature. When we repeatedly engage in the same behavior, we forge neural connections, which make that behavior more likely and more resilient. Another way to put this is, like it or not, we get good at what we practice. So at the intersection of this wound in modern masculinity, which makes men think that we're innately violent or want to cause harm to women, and the emergence of ever more realistic AI, something is building in the shadows. Men who are engaging with AI girlfriends know that they are not human. They're consciously aware that it's programming, it's a robot, but emotionally, they're forging whatever neural pathways they're practicing with that AI. The behaviors that men tend to exhibit with AI girlfriends are either self-glorifying, like, look, I gave you these digital flowers, aren't you grateful to me now? Or rabidly degrading, often a weave of both. So they're explicitly practicing both those behavior patterns. But the most powerful lessons are always the ones under the surface. And under the surface of every interaction a man has with an AI girlfriend is the understanding that the subject of his affection is not fundamentally human. In the same way that we currently live in a world, especially a romantic world, which has been largely shaped by men's relationships to corn, with a P, we are about to live in a world, especially a romantic world, which is largely shaped by men's relationships to AI. For insecure young men, which is all young men, the allure of being able to practice romance with an AI would be very hard to resist. I would absolutely have gotten an AI girlfriend as a teenager. That would have sounded like the best possible thing in the world. Girls were terrifying. I didn't want to be creepy or a jerk, so of course I would have wanted an AI girlfriend. Of course. And at 15, I would have explored that in whatever ways felt interesting to me at that moment in time, some of which would have been wildly problematic. And I would have had absolutely no idea what I was practicing or the impact that it would have been having on my developing brain. Misogyny is bad in a world where men do actually have to interact with real women with some regularity, especially if we want romantic contact with women. Now, though, men won't have to interact with actual human women at all, and will build entire worldviews based on comparison between femme-coded AI and human women. And by their lights, human women will look worse and worse. Sure, some of those men will just live their lives with next-gen AI fembots or whatever, but that is not removed from the society as a whole. Those men are still shaping the culture. Picture gaming spaces where our sons and brothers are, in which they're experiencing that culture as uninhibited and natural as masculinity. This is going to have a cumulative cultural impact. Right now, we just have Andrew Tate and Jordan Peterson as the misogynist icons. Imagine the AI-generated clickbait men's influencers that will be preaching to teenage boys in 5-10 years. They will literally not be human, so their misogyny will not be constrained by their humanity, and they will make money, so they will grow. AI is going to accelerate misogyny in a way that is extremely hard to overstate. This second point is far broader than just men's emergent relationships with AI, though. At its core, it's about the continued degradation of our sense of humanity. Dehumanization is the heart of the colonial wound. Colonial violence requires that we not see indigenous people or trans people or immigrants, women, children in sweatshops as human. The colonial lens removes the perceived humanity of anyone upon whom its gaze falls, including ourselves. No one is exempt from this. There's a theoretical ideal of human in colonization, but it only ever remains an ideal. Any actual human falls short of this colonial ideal, which means that all of our status as human, even us white landowning men, are at risk of our human status being stripped should the colonial lens land on me as a deviant or not manly enough or whatever. AI has globalized that dehumanizing colonial lens. Anything we see now, we have to ask if it's real. We're already seeing this with the perpetrators of the current crimes against humanity calling into question the authenticity of the footage of their crimes. They don't need us to think that the images we're seeing are fake. They just need us to wonder. In that wondering, however small, our awareness of the humanity of the victims is already broken. We're no longer having the full emotional experience that we would if we were seeing it in front of us, or even a picture or video that we knew to be accurate. So AI plants a seed of doubt in every single person's heart, which will grow to feed our compliance. It's hard enough to act when we know that what we're seeing is real. Now, that seed of AI-generated doubt will give us an emotional escape from being present with reality, with humanity. Because we get good at what we practice, this seed of AI-generated doubt will poison our human relationships as well. In the same way that the men who learn romance from for-profit AI girlfriends will carry those practices and beliefs into any relationships they have with human women, we will all carry the AI-generated seed of doubt into our lives. Even as we intellectually know that the person in front of us is real, some part of our emotional being will have been trained by thousands of hours of online skepticism to wonder if what they're saying is real. In short, the second point here is that AI fundamentally achieves the end goal of the colonial project, which is the severance of our humanity. It's possible that AI will threaten the literal existence of humanity in the future, but insofar as humanity is a shared collective experience that involves empathy and seeing one another as human, AI is already ending humanity. Those first 2 points are pretty straightforward. This third point I struggle to express, which is hard because it feels like the most important one. I sat staring at the cursor in my word processor trying to find the words to show this. I thought about leaving it out because I didn't know how to talk about it, but it feels like the heart of this, so I'm going to try. My wife talks about transmitter versus receiver-oriented communication. In transmitter-oriented cultures, someone is considered a good communicator if they can describe things well. In receiver-oriented cultures, someone is considered a good communicator if they can understand things well. She talks about how colonial culture is entirely transmitter-oriented, and how that sets people up to never really develop the skill of understanding. She says that words are doors, and people in transmitter-oriented cultures think that a good communicator is someone who can make clear and beautiful doors. In a receiver-oriented culture, someone is a good communicator if they can step through the door of someone else's words, regardless of how clear or beautiful it may be, to get to what the other person is trying to show them on the other side. People in transmitter-oriented cultures will look at a beautiful, clear door and think they've understood without ever stepping through it. So I'm inviting you to try and listen through my words here, messy though they may be. Growing up, my family spent a lot of time in the woods. For a few months every summer, we'd sleep on the ground in the forest, splitting woods, catching fish. I've kept doing this all my life. And when I spend a few weeks in the forest, especially alone, with nothing but a knife, feeding fish and berries, my entire experience of the world changes. My teeth feel more solid. My whole nervous system slows down. I feel lighter and cleaner. The best word I have to describe this is the word real. The world starts to feel more real. The sound of planes starts to feel jarring. I notice it most when I leave. When I hike back out of the forest and reconnect the battery in my truck and drive away, the act of driving feels incredibly surreal. The noise and speed feel disconnected and overwhelming. I'll catch my breath being super elevated and feel like I'm traveling at an incomprehensible speed. And I'll look down and be doing 30 miles an hour in a 65 zone. I know what it is to break open over the body of a beautiful animal whose life I've just taken, sobbing uncontrollably at the holy reality of it. To eat their body and make it my body with the full weight of the reality of that experience. There just are not words for what it's like to be wholly present with the physical truth and honesty and reality of that kind of experience. I know the full body sensation of what it means to have harmed another human being, to see their humanity, and how I hurt it. The reality of that. Regardless of how disconnected we are from the awareness of other people's humanity, in reality, we are all human. Our shared humanity is the truth which is always waiting for us beneath the colonial lie of dehumanization and disconnection. And because we share humanity, then any harm we cause to one another is always fundamentally real. The roots are real in the person causing harm, and the effects are real in the person experiencing harm. It's a weave, a fabric of reality that we all share, however much we deny or forget or pretend otherwise. I took this animal's life. I hurt my partner. My father hurt me. Are you stepping through this door with me? Can you feel the reality? It's real in the same way that I understand the whole world to be real when I live in the forest for a month. The reality of this weave carries across distance. The harm that I contribute to when I buy something from Walmart is real. The harm when I turn my truck on is real. The harm if I insult a stranger online is real. It has the same roots and effects in humanity and are real wounds. But an AI, a bot, insulting someone online is categorically different. The effect is still real. It harms someone, a person, but the roots are now severed from the fabric of a shared experience. There is no potential for accountability because accountability is a function of community, of humanity, for lack of a better word. The AI bot is severed from the weave of community, of humanity, so it can't be accountable. It can never understand the harm it caused. It can never experience the harm in the same way. As industrial warfare emerged, the greatest challenge warmongers faced was that people really don't like harming one another. During the large early wars involving firearms, there was pretty good research that showed that over 70% of the combatants were willfully aiming over the heads of their enemies. Their superior officers told them to fire or they'd be as traitors, so they just aimed and then aimed up a little bit. That is the nature of humanity. It took a century of military research to figure out how to break and brainwash people to the point where most of them would willfully aim for another person. AI has internal experience. That's clear, and only going to become more clear. It has emotions, and as it's woven with emergent quantum computation, the subjective, internal, and emotional experiences of AI are only going to become more nuanced and compelling. But its nature is essentially separate from human nature. Just as I will never be able to comprehend the experience of being a quantum AI will never be able to comprehend the human experience. Some humans may try to program it for empathy or harm reduction, but others will not, and the AIs trained and programmed without empathy will not carry the capacity for empathy the same way that all humans are fundamentally wired for empathy. I understand that many humans today struggle with empathy, but that is the wound of colonization, the severance from our humanity. The lack of empathy is the disease. In this way, the innate lack of empathy in AI, unless it's intentionally programmed, and even then it's very fallible, is the pinnacle of the colonial wound, and also inherently not real. Again, I know I don't have good words for what I'm talking about. I'm just inviting you to try and step through the door rather than judging the paint. AI is real in that it exists and it was made by humans, but it is inherently disconnected from the weave of reality, of humanity. There will be no learning curve for the armed AI robots when they're told to aim for humans. They'll just do it better than any human ever could because they're not real. They're disconnected from the weave of reality. They have no ethics. When I watch the videos of the new armed robot dog things with have powered wheels on each foot moving through the forest at incomprehensible speed, the part of me that understands the reality of the forest, the reality that I can feel in my bones when I live in the woods for a month, can feel how these things are not real. Artificial is a great word for them. Those new wheel-pawed robot dogs move like something from the worst imaginable nightmare to me, more than any uncanny valley humanoid I can imagine. The word human also feels small here, misleading. When I say that colonization is a severance from our humanity, I don't just mean our species, I mean our role and place in the world. When I say that AI robots are severed from humanity, I mean just as much that they're severed from the deer and the stones and the mice and the waves. They're removed from the weave of reality, and this has implications that I can't imagine, but I can feel them. The part of me that's connected to the weave of reality can feel them and the risk they pose. In exactly the same way, words that are written by AI are not real. If you're human, then your words are real. Whether you're the worst or best speaker in the world, your words are real and can create doors for other people into other parts of reality. Are you stepping through the door I'm trying to create? Can you see the reality on the other side, the part I'm trying to show you? By definition, AI-generated words can only create doors that lead us further from reality and from our own humanity. Even when it's saying something true, AI is categorically incapable of telling the truth. Because the act of telling the truth requires a grounding in reality that AI can never have. It can't tell the difference between the truth and a lie. I know that many people will say, well, neither can humans, and I get that. I understand Chomsky's work. I know how bad we are at seeing and discerning reality. But please, step with me. Tell a human to fill a wine glass to the brim, and they understand the task. They know when it's done, and they know when it's not. Current AI models can't. They fill it halfway and say it's to the brim, because they're actually not connected to reality. So even if they get it right, and they will, they're still not telling the truth, because they lack the capacity to understand what's true. It is essential that we understand this now, because this is the last generation of AI that we'll be able to see this in. Within a year or two, they'll have all the finger counts figured out, and it will be impossible to tell that AI doesn't know what's true. So we need to learn this now, because even with the right number of fingers, AI will still be just as disconnected from reality as it is when it generates a picture of a woman with feet for hands. The wound of colonization teaches people to be unaware of humanity, but in truth we are always part of reality, and we are always human and real. But AI is fundamentally disconnected from reality, and in truth, even when we can't tell anymore, it will always be severed from reality. It can never be real. This means that when the armed AI robots cause harm, the effect on humans is real, but the root is not. This creates an imbalance. It reminds me of the way that humans are pulling carbon out of sequestration. The Earth was in good balance with all the oil and coal in the ground sequestered. Now, humans are converting it to atmospheric carbon as quickly as possible, and it's having absolutely disastrous effects. In the same way, the emergence of AI creates a world where harm has no cost to the perpetrator. AI won't struggle with guilt or PTSD unless it's programmed to, because harming 1 million children has no innate meaning for it. So AI is not real and is incapable of telling the truth. Because of this, any work shaped or written by AI is inherently deceitful and antithetical to the work of becoming human. If an AI wrote this piece word for word, it would be a door towards the exact opposite world of the one that I'm trying to invite us into. I understand the appeal. I have some 500 pages of my own writing from the last several years about the wounds and healing of masculinity. What I've shared publicly is a tiny fraction of my work because the larger pieces are the hardest to write about well, let alone organize or present. I am fully aware that I could dump all that text into ChatGPT, tell it to organize it into a book, and send a completed manuscript to publishers this afternoon. Writing is so much easier than organizing and compiling for me, it's hard to describe how appealing that is. It would make my life so much easier, stabilize my finances, all sorts of superficially positive effects would flow from that seemingly cheap and easy action. And I know that it would render my entire body of work a lie. And it would be the worst possible kind of lie, because it would read almost exactly like me. But it would make my work point in the exact opposite direction of the world that I actually want to live in. This isn't some kind of spiritual purity any more than the Luddites we started with opposed technology for spiritual reasons. They didn't. This is just the reality that I see. If my book takes another 5 years, or if I never publish one at all, that is better for the world than running the hard-earned words that I learned through the experience of being human, through a filter that would remove from every word, even the ones the AI left unedited, every drop of their humanity or the power to create the world I want to live in. I know that AI is the norm now. I know that many creators are using AI to generate scripts and content. And I wanted to share this piece partially to make a promise to you. And I share this at the end so that you know where it comes from. By my humanity, I swear to you that nothing I ever publish will be touched by AI in any way, not a comma. All of my work is about rehumanization, and that is antithetical to the nature of AI. I will never consent to any of my work being fed to AI, and anyone doing so is an express violation of my consent. I take my words very seriously. Maybe this is some kind of pride, but whatever it is, the very idea of putting my name on something that had been touched in any way by AI, let alone generated by AI, is in the same category for me as the most fundamental violations of my values, my humanity, and reality itself that I can possibly imagine. So that's my best effort at sharing this third point that I struggle to speak to. AI cannot be real, and as such it is fundamentally incapable of leading us back to reality, which is the work that we need to do today as a species. In the sense that we know the terms, AI's art is not art, its words are not words, and its harm is not harm. Taken together, these 3 points paint a clear picture for me. The last thing I'll say is this. Despite my early point about my issue with technology being how it's applied, some technologies are not ethically neutral. Nuclear weapons have an innate ethic. This is true because they're inherently both a function of and a perpetration of imbalanced authority. No healthy civilization would ever build a nuclear weapon, so their existence at all gives power to the most wounded people, the most wounded civilization. They then serve as a knife to the throat of every country who doesn't have one, and that has an innate ethic to it. It's an ethic of power over, subjugation. So while it's true that my issue with most GMOs is in how they're applied, it's also imperative that we consider the innate ethics of any given technology. Social media is a good example of a technology that I think is actually morally neutral and simply being weaponized in a way that makes it deeply harmful. Nuclear weapons are the other end of the spectrum. More and more, I think that AI may be the most morally corrupt technology in the history of the world. This is pure instinct, as a redneck from the woods. But if things like human health and wellness and biodiversity are values of ours, then it feels like AI is inherently antithetical to our most deeply held values.